Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Think Suburbia, the podcast of the Suburban Virginia Republican Coalition. I'm Mike Ginsberg. I'm one of the founders of SUVGOP and one of the hosts of the podcast.
Hi, I'm Jill Cook. I'm another founder of SUVGOP and the co-host of the podcast. And we want to welcome today's guest. Our guest today is David Norcross. He is an attorney, Alexandria resident, longtime member of the RNC, and former general counsel for the RNC. Also has served as chairman of the board of governors of the Republican National Lawyers Association. Welcome, David.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Excellent. So David is an expert on political and election law, and we brought him on the podcast to discuss a very, very crucial issue that's going to be on the ballot this November for everybody in the state of Virginia. It's the redistricting amendment. It would create a bipartisan commission of 8 Republicans, 8 Democrats, mixed half and half with legislatures and citizens to draw the districts. So David, first tell us a little bit more about the redistricting process in your experience and your background and about this one.
Well, let me just give you a notion of where I've been in the redistricting process over the years. I've been an appointing authority once, twice. I have served on a redistricting commission. I have negotiated map drawing on behalf of the Republican congressional delegation in New Jersey twice, and the Pennsylvania Senate delegation once. I have litigated the matter in Pennsylvania. In fact, before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, I lost. So my experiences as a participant, as a state chairman, and as an advocate.
Wow, that is loads of experience. I think we got the right person here, right, Mike?
I think so. Absolutely. Absolutely. So maybe just, for our viewers and our listeners, tell us what redistricting is and why it is such an important process in politics.
Well, one of the things that's fascinating about it is that the general public from one year to the next never thinks about it. The politically interested think about it about every 10 years. It happens every 10 years after the decennial census. And the Constitution requires that each district be, I think the words of the Constitution is relatively equal. The Supreme Court stepped in the 60s and turned relatively equal into gotta be pretty much exactly equal. And when computers came along, that became exactly equal. So we're required to do it by the Constitution. It has been historically left to the legislatures of the various states to do both congressional redistricting and the redistricting of their own legislature. It is enormously important because it determines in many, many occasions, who actually controls the legislature or each house.
Right, and that's because I guess one of the concepts, I guess right now here in Virginia, the General Assembly draws the district lines, and the amendment potentially would change that. I guess one of the things that maybe you were sort of getting at, that the control of the legislature is dictated by, I guess, that process that is sometimes referred to as gerrymandering, which is sort of drawing the districts in a way that benefits one party versus another. What do you think are the negative consequences of gerrymandering? I mean, why is that something that maybe we would want to see done away with or limited?
Well, the word has negative connotations, obviously, but a gerrymander is really in the eye of the beholder. You can argue that any legislative district drawing is a gerrymander in some way or another. One of the unfortunate things that the reformers talk about is, well, let's make it fair and nonpartisan. Well, it cannot be nonpartisan. It is a partisan action. You are, after all, dealing with seats in a partisan legislature, and you are determining who's going to control that legislature in some circumstances, not all of them, but in a state that is pretty evenly balanced between the parties, Where the districts are will determine who controls the legislature.
And here, one thing you mentioned that I just want to highlight and emphasize is that this is every 10 years. So what happens this year in Virginia is going to be in place for 10 years. That is a very, very negative effect if we are in the vast minority. So I just wanted to point that out. Also, so tell us about this amendment. How would the amendment in Virginia, if we pass it, how would that affect the process?
Well, if it were left to me, I would let the legislatures continue to do it. I understand that the legislatures being partisan, the majority party wants to control the districts, and I understand the unfairness of that. I've litigated cases and been on commissions where that's been the case. What I would do would be require that the minority in the legislative houses sign off on the program by requiring a 30%, 35%, whatever, of the minority to approve of the districts. But that's not the case here, and that's not the proposition that's being put forward. What I like about the proposition that's being put forward is the extent of legislative participation. The commissions on which I served, I don't think any of them ever had a legislator on the commission, and I think that's a big mistake. This proposition allows the legislators to have significant input, if not control, over the outcome. That's good because legislators understand districts and what it means more than anybody else. They know that you can't simply say, all right, let's have it fair and nonpartisan. That's a standard that is not really real. So to the extent that we have legislators involved, that's good. I believe this commission, as proposed, is about as good a commission, a redistricting commission, as you can have. So I'm very much in favor of this referendum, passing this referendum.
Okay, so can we get back, we mentioned it at the beginning, but just so it's clear to our listening audience. So tell us what the bipartisan commission would be comprised of. Who are the members?
Well, you got it exactly right. It has equal number of legislators from each party, and they pick non-legislators of equal numbers in Republicans and Democrats, and then they do the drawing.
Okay.
The one thing that I think is troublesome about this proposition is that it ultimately leaves it to the courts. And that, in my experience, has never resulted in a happy outcome. What I would hope is that after this commission is done with its work, the legislators will realize that they are better off coming to a deal among themselves than they are rolling the dice with judges who have, well, I don't know what the judge's preferences or gerrymandering wants would be, but believe me, anybody who draws lines has preferences.
So by that you're referring to the fact that if they don't if this bipartisan commission of 16 people does not reach a consensus, it then goes to the Virginia Supreme Court. Is that what you're referring to?
Correct.
Okay.
Why do you think, it's a very interesting, why do you think that the commission is just right? I mean, it sounded like you were very bullish on the composition of the way it is. Can you maybe dive into that a little more deeply?
Sure. It isn't just right. What in my view would be just right is letting the legislators do it and require minority caucus to sign off on the result, or else it goes to the Supreme Court. But acknowledging that that's not possible, that's not going to happen. What's good about this proposition is that it has legislators on it of both parties, and it has people whom the legislators have selected. I am assuming that legislators will select people who know what they're doing and understand the state and understand what the consequences of their actions are. So I don't see how, other than leaving it to legislators, I don't see how it gets better than this. The more legislative input, the better, because it is political. They understand their districts. They understand their neighboring districts. It's about them, and they ought to be able to draw the lines. I am perfectly happy with the fact that it isn't going to be done by a majority party. I've been on both sides of that. It's wonderful when you're in the majority. It's never good when you're in the minority. This is the kind of compromise that will sort that out.
And you know,
and do you think that this is, I guess, maybe better than the alternative, which is the status quo? I mean, why do you think that the amendment would be better than the status quo?
Well, that's very interesting. The status quo was fine as far as I was concerned when the Republicans controlled both houses of the legislature, or even just one house.
right.
But there's the possibility going forward that that's not going to be the case. That being said, I would rather have a commission properly composed, as this one is, do the job, than leave it to the Democrats to do for the next 10 years.
And this follow, I was going to follow up with this when you answered the other question. The Democrats were completely on board with this amendment before they won the majority. And it's a really, I use the word hypocrisy, but the shift, they had total bipartisan support before they won all the houses. And now they're voting, it's no on their ballot, I think. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. And it's that scenario perfectly describes the battles over redistricting. When it was one house controlled by one party and one house controlled by the other, they reached a compromise. The legislators reached a compromise.
Right.
Now that the Democrats have taken control of both houses, a lot of Democrats, predominantly in the House of Delegates, want to go back to the system, let us do it, or the proposition by the House of Delegates put forth, which almost upended this and prevented it from ever getting on the ballot. Their proposition is a nonpartisan, which is impossible, nonpartisan commission drawing fair lines concerning social justice and anything else they can think about. That just doesn't work. This is a nuts and bolts job. And the best way you can get that is in a bipartisan fashion. And this commission does that. Right.
So talking about the nuts and bolts of this, so should this amendment pass and the commission is created, when would the first election under the new districts be held? When would the process start? Would it affect 2021 or is it going to be later than that?
They will start to work in 2021.
Okay.
If they finish the job, which is questionable, and this is a tedious job, and it's bound to be contentious, and frankly, it should be contentious. If they finish in time to have the districts drawn for 2021 primaries, that's when it will start.
Okay.
My suspicion is that it's not going to start till 2022 House seats. And this issue has been very litigious in Virginia in the last 10 years. And while I'm hopeful that they can reach a conclusion that the courts stay out of, I am more hopeful than confident.
Gotcha. One of the things, I mean, we call ourselves the Suburban Virginia Republican Coalition. We are very much focused on the suburban voter and particularly winning suburban voters to the Republican Party and pushing on that issue pretty hard. How do you think, I mean, what benefits do you think a suburban voter would see with the passage of this amendment?
That's if we're focused on Northern Virginia, that's very difficult to predict. Northern Virginia is so heavily Democrat at the moment that what difference this is going to make is difficult to say. This is hardly a wonderful standard, but it won't be worse.
That's a good point. It can't be worse.
Won't be worse.
Nothing is so bad that it can't get worse, but it sounds like in this case this was a
an interesting concept, but
as a Republican in Northern Virginia.
That's something I learned from my father. Nothing is so bad it can't get worse. But he was an eternal pessimist, so no, but I guess
I certainly hope your father is not right in this case.
I do too. I think personally, I mean, from my perspective, it is an improvement. One of the things that I thought might be attractive to a suburban voter is, look, I mean, you don't have to go very far or listen too hard to hear, partisanship and rancor and the feeling that, just people are at battle stations with one another politically. And one of the things I guess I thought might be contributing to that is the fact that, the precision with which we can draw districts is such, we can draw so many safe seats that there is no sort of penalty for, being, awfully belligerent and politically, whether it's either side. Belligerence is rewarded and not necessarily punished. And so you can have a lot of people in safe seats who take, highly extreme and sometimes inflammatory positions because they can. And part of that is because they're confident, and for example, they might go to a hair salon, that's closed, knowing that they're going to get reelected, even if they come across as a giant hypocrite. Just to take one example. But I guess that's what I mean is that the electorates are so precisely drawn, and there's so many safe seats that you do have it turns up the boil rather than lowering the boil in political discourse.
Well, this is why I answered the question focused on Northern Virginia. Mm-hmm. It's pretty difficult. Now, I've not tried to draw districts in Northern Virginia. I paid attention because I've had a friend who ran for Congress, and I understood what was done with this district to add more Democrats to it. But the fact of the matter is, it's very hard to have anything except a safe seat in Northern Fairfax, Arlington, Alexandria. It's just difficult. And that's not because anybody is cheating the process. It's just there are an overwhelming number of Democrats.
Exactly.
When you move out to Loudoun and Fauquier and you get away from Northern Virginia, you get the area around Roanoke, maybe even parts of the Tidewater, it will make a difference. And the difference is exactly what you were saying, that it will, we hope, be less rancorous under those circumstances. But up here, it's hard to say it's going to make a big difference. Hope I'm wrong.
Right.
No, that's a good way. Well, since all of us right now on this podcast are Northern Virginia residents, we feel it. But this is something that is important to the whole state. This is very important to everybody. And we cannot emphasize enough that this is going to be on the ballot for everybody in Virginia. And it's getting this message out that we're mostly focused on here at SUVGOP. Are there any other points that you'd like to make that we have not covered yet?
I think we've pretty well covered them. One interesting thing that we didn't cover, when we began to add computers to this system, we all thought that was the solution and the salvation. It turns out that made it harder, because now it isn't almost balanced or substantially balanced. Now it is absolutely balanced. And what that hurts is community of interest. And even in situations where they're all Democrats, there is a community of interest. And with the emphasis on exact numbers, the emphasis on community of interest is not there anymore. It's diminished. Now, you understand what I mean by community of interest?
Yeah, yeah. Well, maybe explain it for listeners.
Yeah.
Well, the community of interest is, let's do it in a gross sense. Arlington is a community of interest. Alexandria is a community of interest. Within those two jurisdictions are other communities of interest. Old Town South in Alexandria is an example. The idea, when we used to do redistricting, we were able to deal with that community of interest more easily, because we didn't have to be exact with the numbers. Now being exact with the numbers means that we have to put people together who may not share a very deep community of interest.
Right.
I think that's unfortunate, but there is really no way to be exact numerically and make community of interest a significant part of the design. And yet it still crops up, it's still used, but difficult to do.
Well, yeah, especially when you see some of these jagged lines like Mike, the 11th district, those people are not connected at all in a lot of ways.
Exactly.
You know?
And what happened there was either an attempt to force more Democrats or more Republicans into an area and to get the numbers exact.
Right.
With when you get down to the final tinkering, community of interest is the first thing out the window.
Right. Yes. So that's a good example of that. Excellent. Well, that's a new piece of information that a lot of people probably don't have in thinking about this.
Well, you know, people think about, I think I started out by saying most people don't think about this at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes in retrospect, when it comes up as an issue of who's controlling the legislature, then they recognize it. Other people may think about it once every 10 years. A lot of people just don't think about it at all. The trouble with the reformers is that gives them a foot in the door, and they start talking about nonpartisan and fair and so forth and so on. One interesting example is majority-minority districts became popular some years ago.
Right.
And that resulted in packing African Americans, for the most part, into a district, which took them out of another district, which means that while they might get a member out of it, they had no influence on the adjoining district. Redistricting is sort of like squeezing a balloon. You squeeze it in one place and a problem pops out somewhere else.
Right. That's a good visual. I like that. That's a very good visual. Yeah. Well,
and in fact, I mean, there was some opposition from African American delegates to this, the redistricting amendment.
That's where the opposition came from.
Right.
And what I am sure they want to do is they want to ensure a, quote, fairer situation for African Americans. If you draw districts with African Americans in mind, or with Republicans in mind, or with men in mind, if that's your focus, it's going to be unfair to somebody else.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
right.
that's why we think people need education on this subject, which is why we're doing this. And we need to keep talking about it. We need to keep educating the Virginia electorate. And we really thank you for making a lot of things clear about this. Yeah.
Well, my pleasure. It's a fascinating subject. And the more people understand it, the better off we are.
That is true. That is true. Well, thank you for your time. Mike, any final things?
No. Let me add my thanks to David for this very educational and great talk on a very important topic. And so if you enjoyed this podcast, you can catch this one as well as all of our podcasts at our website, SUVGOP.com. Go to the drop-down menu, SUVGOP's podcasts, and you'll find links to every podcast that we've done. We really have covered the waterfront of issues with candidates, with issue experts. It's a great series of things. You can really learn a lot, and we encourage you to visit there, SUVGOP.com. So with that, that, thank you for joining us for this edition of Think Suburbia, and we look forward to having you join us for the next edition of Think Suburbia, our podcast of the SUVGOP. Thanks again. Have a great day.